Today we are going to be talking about integers and opposites, along with graphing those numbers on a number line and absolute values. Let's take a look at some of the types of problems that we'll end up seeing on part number 1 here. And the first set of directions asks us to graph each integer and its opposite on a number line. And so when we talk about opposite, we're talking about sign. And so if the number's positive, the opposite is negative. If the number's negative, the opposite is positive. So if I wanted to graph 8 on a number line, I'd go down the number line until I find the number 8. Well, the opposite of 8 is going to be negative 8. So I would go way down here and put a point right here. So I'm just putting a point or a dot right on those two numbers. So the opposite of 8 equals negative 8. So the opposite of negative 8 equals positive 8. So those are the two opposites. So what do you notice about that distance from 8 to 0 or negative 8 to 0? Well, look at those distances, and you see how that distance is exactly the same. So it's the same jump. We're 8 spaces from 0, or from negative 8, we're still 8 spaces from 0. We're going to be using that concept when we're talking about opposites. So when I look at negative 7, if I wanted to plot that one, I go over and I look for negative 7. Well, I don't see it, but I see that negative 7 is in between negative 6 and negative 8. And the opposite would end up being the positive of that number. So it would be positive 7. And so I'd go over to positive 7 and put a dot there. And so when I go ahead and look at that distance from negative 7 to 0 and from 7 to 0, I see those two distances equal each other. So those are the same distances. And so that's all I'm doing is just putting dots right at those 2 points. And so same thing here, negative 5, go ahead and plot that point. And then the opposite would be positive 5. So that's all I'm doing is just really putting those two dots. The little loops are just showing you that that distance from that number to 0 is exactly the same. So from negative 5 to 0, that's the same as going from 5 to 0. And so we use that concept when we're trying to compare, because when we compare numbers, we're trying to see which number is bigger. So this symbol right here is going to tell us a number is smaller when we're reading from left to right. And this is going to tell us a number is bigger. So the open portion goes to the bigger number. Well, when I look at negative 15 and negative 7, I see that negative 15 is further to the left. So this is further to the left. And to the left means that we have smaller numbers. So there's always smaller numbers. This is the smaller numbers side. So these numbers are smaller. And then this way, our numbers are getting bigger. We have bigger numbers. And so when I compare them, I'm looking to see which one is closer to 0 in this case, because these are both negative numbers. And so negative 7 is bigger because it's closer to 0. Well, when I look at these numbers, one's negative, one's positive. The number that's positive is going to be the bigger number when we're dealing with opposite signs. So the same thing here. When we're looking at this one, always the number that is positive is going to be bigger. So the positive is bigger. And the reason is because it's further to the right. So that's our bigger number. Well, here we have two negatives. So here, when we have two negatives, we have to figure out which one's closer to 0, or which one's further to the left would be the smaller one. The one closer to 0 is the bigger. So the closer to 0 is the bigger number, because we're dealing with two negatives here. So negative 18 is bigger because it's closer to 0 on the number line. And so we'll take a look at this one. I'll actually draw the number line out for you. And if this is negative 16, and let's say down here is negative 6, 0 would be about right here. And so you can see that negative 6, here's negative 16, Negative 6 is the bigger number because the bigger numbers are off to the right, and the smaller numbers are off to the left. These are our smaller numbers. And so the bigger number is negative 6 because it's closer to 0 when we're dealing with two negatives. Here, if you look at it, I'll just sketch this one out for you. Here's 0. Let's say this is negative 11, and this is positive 11. The bigger one is the one further to the right. So 11 is bigger than this negative 11. So that's why it opens towards 11. Over here, it talks about some word problems. The wind chill on a cold day made it feel like 5 degrees below 0. So does that mean that, and they're asking us to write the temperature as an integer, does that mean it's a negative 5 or is it a positive 5? Well, let's take a look at a number line. Here's 0. If I'm below 0, which way do you think I'm going? Do I go towards the bigger numbers, bigger or to the right, or do I go towards the smaller numbers, smaller or to the left? Well, negative 5, since it's below, that means we'd be to the left. That's smaller than 0. So negative 5 would be my answer. Here it says a baby gained 15 pounds. So this is the key word here, gained. When you gain, does that mean that you're getting bigger or you're getting smaller? Well, gained means that the baby's getting bigger. So that means we're going to the bigger numbers. Well, which way is the bigger numbers? Here's 0. Are the biggers to the right or to the left? Well, we've been saying they're to the right. And those are the bigger numbers out here. Smaller numbers are to the left. And so we would use 15 as a positive number to represent this. So positive 15 is the integer we would use. Christy dove a depth of 12 feet below. So below, that's the key word, below the surface of the water. Write the depth as an integer. Well, let's go ahead and think of it this way. Instead of we've done horizontal ones quite some time, let's take a look at a vertical axis. Here's 0. This is like the water surface right here. So here's the water surface. And we went 12 feet below the water. Well, which way do you think shows the bigger numbers? Well, the bigger numbers would be up. Just as the bigger numbers were to the right when we're going on the horizontal axis, when we're looking at a vertical axis, the bigger numbers are up. They're going above 0. Smaller numbers, smaller is going down. And so below 0 means that we are on the smaller side. To show that it's a smaller number than 0, I'd have to have a negative. So negative 12 would be the integer we would use to represent that. A company reported a net gain. Gain, what does that mean? Does that mean bigger or smaller? So a gain of $750,000. And a net loss, we got to think about what that means, of $2 million. Write each as an integer. And so an integer is either going to be a positive or a negative number, like on a number line. So if we are gaining, that means that we have positive 750,000. But if we have a loss, so a gain meant bigger, and bigger means that we're on the positive side. Loss means smaller. That means from 0, it is on the negative side. So this would be a negative 2 million. Well, here it says the record low temperature in Virginia through 1997 was 30 degrees Fahrenheit, below 0. Below 0. So how do you think you write 30 degrees below 0? Well, again, if you look at, let's do a number line going up and down again. Here's 0. Below 0 is on this side. So is this a negative or a positive? Well, since we're going below, that means we're going smaller. And smaller means negative. So it'd be a negative 30. So that's one of the numbers. Then it said the record high temperature was 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, is 110 bigger or smaller? Well, that's a lot bigger. So we're way up here at 110 degrees. And so 110 degrees would be a positive number. So that's a positive. So there it is. The two integers. And here it says the highest point in North Carolina is Mount Mitchell with a height of 6,684 feet. And so we want to write that as an integer. And so here's the mountain. Here's like sea level here. So this is 0 feet. And here is Mount Mitchell way at the top, and that's at 6,684 feet. Now we are above 0. Since we're going above, these are the bigger numbers. And so do we write that as a negative or a positive? Well, since we're above, that's a positive. 6,684 feet would be our answer, or just 6,684 since it's just an integer, but it's positive. Well, those are the problems for part 1. Check out part 2 for more problems.